Julie Ishuru. I'm a TV host based in Kenya, but broadcasting further afield, hosting the show Africa Leadership Dialogues. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you this morning and this breakfast session. And as the mics are checked and switched on, let me just give you a little bit of a context. Now, as the narrative of Africa Rising takes hold globally, there's increased focus on African leadership. The greatest challenge facing Africa today is certainly the pressure to deliver on three particular issues. And those are sustainable economic growth, number one, sustainable development, that's number two, transformational development, poverty reduction. And this is a huge challenge for many countries across the continent. Now, during and just after the struggle for independence, Africa saw leaders who made extremely difficult but visionary decisions and political choices, very sacrificial leaders, and they championed the liberation struggle. They forged unity, many of them, in their countries. However, can we say the same of leaders across Africa today? And this is perhaps one of the reasons we are seated here this morning. There are difficult choices to be made. Are our leaders making those choices? So we're live streaming this session this morning, reaching a much bigger audience that we have in here today. And this is all coming under the banner of what is called the Shared Societies Project run by Club Madrid, which is an organization that has 85 former presidents and prime ministers under its banner. Shared societies simply means inclusive societies, cohesive societies, where everyone's dignity and human rights is respected, and where people also have equal opportunities. Now, this project is intended to try to make the case for shared society using the presidents, former presidents and heads of state, by actually engaging people in discussions of this kind, promoting partnerships, and providing leaders with the right tools. We're hoping this is what will come out of this discussion this morning. So we recognize Club Madrid, but we'd also like to take a moment to recognize the Uongozi Institute based right here in Tanzania. Now, it's a leadership development institute, and for Tanzanians sitting thinking, we know Uongozi very well. For the purposes of those who are guests this morning, let me tell you a little bit more about it. It's housed under the Office of the President of the United Republic of Tanzania, and it's funded by the Finnish government. The focus is research, policy as well, and events of this kind that seek to bring together key decision makers to discuss issues of importance to sustainable development. Thank you very much, Club Madrid and Uongozi, for putting this together for us this morning. Now, with us today, President Olusegun Obasanjo, President Benjamin Mkapa, and President Festus Mogae. Thank you for making time. We go straight into our discussions. And President Mkapa, I really do want to begin with you. Tanzania, in very many ways, has been able to embrace a unity that is not evident in many other African societies, and maybe is a step ahead of many other countries in terms of shared societies, or the notion of shared societies. And so I ask you, President Mkapa, how did Tanzania achieve this? And what's the importance of it?
Thank you. It's a long story.
Make it short.
The key, I think, the first key is, of course, leadership. We were fortunate to have a leader with a very, very human perspective of development, a very egalitarian in outlook, very inclusive in consultation. And a party that was really people-oriented, quickly going there for the people to seek their opinions, but also to get their endorsement of policies as they were formulated. In addition to that, we have had the lack of having a common language spoken by almost all of the 125 or so ethnic groups or tribal groups in the country. That helped to unite us together. In the first 30 years or so, we had a one-party system of government, and that also helped us to unite. At least it made discussion much easier and less controversial. Over and above the one-party state, we had a parliamentary system that was very regular in seeking renewal of parliamentary leadership, in the sense that elections were held very regularly. That settled minds. Those who were ambitious felt that they could afford to wait, and those who lost felt that it was not the end of the world because there would be another election. So all those things put together built an attitude of mind which was very favorable for consensus seeking. I think I can only do that by an illustration of the way we arrived, for instance, at the Development Vision 2025. Conceptually, it was started by my predecessor and his prime ministers, who are fortunately with us here, Prime Minister John Marechal, Prime Minister Dr. Suya. A nationwide discussion, all inclusive, about where we were going and where we would be by 2025. It was necessary because after 30 years of a public sector driven economy, there was clear pressure now for the private sector to be given, or at least to play a much more important contribution to the growth of the economy. One. Secondly, there was more pressure now to contain the emergence of an economic class that would be exploitative in the environment in which we found ourselves, and to define the kind of society we have. Over and above that, we felt that there was a need to change the orientation of people from dependence on the state and the so-called bilaterals and multilaterals to accepting a larger role for self-driven economic transformation. So, usually as an MP, you would be asking, when are you doing this, when are you doing this? But it was necessary now because of the changes in the world, really, and the paucity of assistance, whether bilateral or multilateral. It was necessary now to change the orientation of the people so that they would grasp the necessity of self-development and self-reliance, which had always been there on our development strategy, but it was not taking enough profile. So out of all that, and coming out of the war with Idi Amin, it was felt that we had to rethink, obviously. And the way to unite the people is to see how we could produce a national development vision. So, as I said, conceptually it was defined and so on by my predecessors. I decided to carry it forward as extensively as I could. And so, the Planning Commission, which was then under the President's office, was asked to produce a first draft. They produced one, and then we laid it out for discussion throughout the country. All kinds of groups, political parties, all of them. And remember, we had just come out of one party system, but all the political parties discussed this agenda. And all religious groups discussed this agenda. The parliamentarians discussed this agenda. The farmers' associations discussed this agenda. The women and the youth discussed this agenda until we were able, by 1999, to produce what is called the National Development Vision 2025. The advantage of that is that now everyone has participated. No one can say they were excluded. Two, it has elicited a commitment for the realization of those goals set out in there, in critical sectors of growth of the economy. It has elicited a commitment by the population as a whole, and it's very difficult to keep about that. And so now we are left with the task of periodic review of strategy rather than conceptualization or definition or statement of where you want to be 2025. And I think this is the kind of consensus-seeking process, attitude, which has enabled us to stick together, even as the multi-party system has strengthened over the last 20 years. I think this is all that I can say at the time, but there are others in here who are more knowledgeable than I am, and they'll be able to tell us.
We'll come back to more of that in a moment. And you know, I find it interesting the way President Mkapa makes it seem so simple. You know, this is what we did, and yet when you look at even some of our neighboring countries here, you realize it's never quite that simple. And so let me come to you, President Obasanjo. Shared societies, inclusive societies.
Some of our countries are facing that challenge, and whether it is issues of ethnicity, religion, gender, a multiplicity of issues. In your experience, President Obasanjo, as our nations try to forge more equitable, inclusive societies, what are the greatest internal and external challenges to that?
Thank you very much. You made a statement earlier, and I will go back to that. That what we saw of leadership in Africa immediately after independence, maybe the quality of leadership had gone down, or maybe the visionary leader that the independence struggle provided may no longer be there. I will not 100% agree with that statement, but I will put it this way, that the independence struggle by itself forged common purpose. And of course, adversity has a way of bringing up leaders. The adversity of colonialism brought out leaders who struggled for independence, and in the process of struggling for independence also emerged as national leaders, if not national heroes. In the process, those countries that had the law, and I underline that, were able to emerge with an identified national leader that was able, as we have heard from President Mkapa, to forge unity and forge development in the country. My own country, Nigeria, was not that way. Because in the process of struggling for independence, we had three strong regions: the West, the East, and the North. And each of them is big enough to be a country. Not only is each of them big enough to be a country, each of them was ruled by a different political party. Each leader was larger than life within his own country. And in fact, it was not easy for Nigeria to agree to the date of independence. And that was why our independence was a little bit delayed. We started with what they call internal self-governance for the regions. East and West achieved internal self-governance in 1957. The North said it was not ready. And so the North attained independent internal self-governance in 1959. And until each region attained internal self-governance, we could not have an independence for the country. Now, at the time of independence, we take Nigeria to the people of the West will still romanticize about the time of our war. The people of the East will today still romanticize about the time and period of Nigeria's history. And so the North. That's one of the reasons why, unfortunately, we have to fight a civil war. So if we now want to start by saying, yes, we have the diversity of religion, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of social strata. Now, the first thing, other than independence, that brought us together is civil war. The fact that we were able to fight civil war and successfully put Nigeria together. That's the first thing. Now, the next thing that came out of that, or along with that, is the breaking of the country into more states and the three big regions. We initially had 12 states, so that those regions that thought that they were big were broken up, and the states became the instrument or the component units of the federation. I think another thing that helped us, where we have moved a little bit forward, is the fact that our Constitution, as of today, puts certain clauses in it that make for unity. One, it doesn't matter how many votes we have, we must have certain national spread, and that is important. So you do not have a situation where you can carry votes in your state. For instance, 2 of what we call 6 geopolitical zones of Nigeria can almost have 50% of the population, the southwest and the northwest. Between them, they have almost 50%. That you cannot just say you win the votes of the northwest and southwest and you become president of Nigeria. You must have a certain percentage in the rest of the country. Secondly, even in appointing ministers, we have what we now call federal character. And appointing ministers, placing people, recruiting people, they have federal character, which means also that you have to cover the whole country. But I had an unusual experience. And my unusual experience is that normally in Africa and even in Nigeria, your political base is normally your tribe or your ethnic group. When I conducted election in 1999, my tribe or ethnic group of the southwest, which forms 20% of the population of Nigeria, did not vote for me. That's a bit unusual. And but I won the election with almost 3% of the vote cast. And that started to change the perception and the situation in Nigeria that you do not necessarily have to be a tribal girl to be a leader of Nigeria. Because there are those who are tribal girls in the past who made the effort and did not make it. And here is was said to me. Now, what is it that has made it possible for you to lose the vote of your tribe and win the national election? I couldn't answer the question. Maybe this proposal can help me answer that question. Thank you very much.
Before we leave, you used the word luck, which I will come back to. We will come back to that later, because were some African countries lucky to have a certain kind of leadership or a certain kind of communities, and others less lucky, or is there more to it than that? President Festus Mogai, I come to you next. And the challenges are many, but some African nations have managed to reach what Donald Kaberuka would call the tipping point rather than a turning point. The challenge then is, in societies, when we do start to build shared societies, to have greater inclusion, how do you ensure a legacy that can stand the test of time in view of all the pressures to change things?
Thank you very much. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stand up because I come from a very small country. Nigeria is the largest country. Tanzania is the largest country in East Africa. In both in terms of... Yes, I am. Why do you think I like
Please go ahead.
I'm thinking a virtue of necessity. Well, really, I will admit that in terms of inclusion, shared society, as Botswana, we had less of a challenge than any of the other bigger countries. Partly because, as I've said, we were a small country. We were the poorest, least developed country in Southern Africa, surrounded by relatively developed countries. South Africa, Rhodesia, and now Southwest Africa, now Namibia. Even though there are many similarities between Namibia and us, the fact is that the urban areas of Namibia were developed because they have more white population. That wasn't the case in Botswana. Even our capital was in South Africa, in a town called Bafokeng. Well, that's part of colonial history. We don't have time for it. It is also a fact that there are two Tswana states or provinces in South Africa, each of them bigger than the Botswana population. The Northwest Province and the Northern Province, Northern Cape. I mean, the Northern Cape Province and Northwest Province are Tswana provinces of South Africa. So even our fellow Botswana in South Africa looked down upon us because we were primitive, not least developed, but underdeveloped. And that's why we didn't have a liberation struggle. When we told the British, hey, we want our independence, they said you can have your desert anytime you have it. We said, yeah, we want it. So we have it. I want to tell my South African cousins, and you know what? The reason why we struggle, these guys that developed their countries, big cities, railways, airways, and whatnot, that's why you had to fight. We didn't have to fight for that because when we asked the British, we want independence, they said, you can have it, then we had it. And then we said, okay, what do we do from here? So I think from the very beginning, we felt that we needed each other. We are also, admittedly again, we are relatively homogeneous. I think 80% of the population is one ethnic group, the Tswana group. But of course, there is a total of 11 ethnic groups in our country. But there was relative cohesion. But also our traditions as Botswana are consultative. You know, even in our ethnic groups in Africa. Some are more dictatorial than others, traditional, the traditions. Ours were always very, very consultative. So from day one, partly because we were poor, and partly because it was a tradition anyway, everything we did by consultation. What should we do? What can we do together? So the challenge of discrimination or exclusion wasn't that great. There is one important ethnic group, that is the Basawa, or Bushmen, as they are called. They are very different from all of us. All of us are said to be Bantu. And they are culturally very, very different. But even they were included, but they remain a challenge in their culture. And so, again, I believe we have some luck. Our original leaders were very insightful and visionary. So that Kama was a friend of Nyarele. But of course, one thing we never did, we never had one party state, and we never labeled our system. And we always had multi-party, and we didn't say we were socialist or capitalist. We just went on saying we are ourselves. But we did do some of the things that Tanzania did. Free education, free health, to the extent that we could afford it, without saying whether it's socialism or capitalism or economy. So that continued that when we discovered mineral resources, again, either out of their visionariness or luck, before the revenues could come, our national leaders, Ratahama and Masire, my immediate predecessor, they went around the country saying that the minerals should vest in the state and the revenues should be used for national purposes. That was necessary because the tribal districts or provinces, now we call them districts now. At that time, the revenue, the mineral rights vested in the tribes and their chiefs. So we didn't have to grab them, we consulted them and offered what we would do, and we were able to give consensus. I think it was good, either it was clever of us or lucky, because doing that way, before the revenues actually came, it was easier to be objective, even both on the part of us and the people themselves. I suspect that had we tried to do so later, changing, that would have been a problem. But it wasn't. And then, as a result of that, we promised that the revenues would be used for national development. We then had to agree, again through the same consultative system, that the national priorities on which the revenues will be used. And because we were mostly uneducated, we agreed that education and training, public health and primary health care delivery, provision of water in a semi-arid area, physical infrastructure, including roads, connecting the different regions, were a priority. And incidentally, I was a civil servant for 23 years in the Treasury, Ministry of Planning and so on. Mr. Sua, we know that we used to discuss. So, even in our planning, we produced 5-year development plans, 3-year running, and we would show how each project is funded, showing mineral revenues were accounted for separately so that everybody could see. That is the practice until today. Nevertheless, we did have challenges, for instance, during my time. Two of the most dominant minorities, that they were, especially when South Africa came with 13, is it 13 or 11 official languages? something like that, including Setswana, of course. So some of other more dominant minorities said, why don't we have a national language as official languages, like in South Africa? We said, hey, but there are only a few of us. We can afford it. But yes, and then they said, the Constitution, Section 77, 78, 79, doesn't mention this one, doesn't mention that one. So I set up a commission, went around for 3 months, produced a report, and many of the MPs were kind of non-committal because they weren't sure how the people would react. But so I made the decision consultatively. It worked. It alleviated that so that that thing died down. The remaining challenge is the Bushmen. I think we have done a wonderful job with the Bushmen because they are scattered all over. We have a Bushman development program, always had, and with the assistance of the Scandinavians. The British, their view was that so long as we leave them in the parks hunting and so on, they have done that for 3,000 years, so you shouldn't bother. But the Scandinavians came and said, no, 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 you say you are a democracy. You have to interfere with their culture. Running around half naked, hunting in the desert is not anybody's culture, it's subsistence. These people cannot be there for the amusement of Europeans when they come and see your animals. So we had to persuade them over time to settle down into settlement because they didn't have villages or settlements. No, they just went all over the place. Now we have 65 Basara settlements. The children go to school because also the Scandinavians reminded us that education is compulsory, it's a human right, and it uses the Basara. So I think it's working. However, there is a group of about 1,000 people who have refused. Well, first they agreed to leave a park, a national park, to outside the park. And they have a village, a modern village with school, clinic, everything. And they agreed. But a British NGO called Survival International came and said, no, no, it's wrong, these people I'm interfering with, it's their culture, the Central Kalahari Game Reserve is theirs, and they blasted us in the internet. At that time we were primitive, we didn't know what they are saying about us. We were only told later by others. But anyway, we are happy that that situation. Basically, that's how we have done with cohesion. Really, we do have a tradition, both before and after independence, of consultation. So we are really very inclusive. I myself come from a minority, but a minority that has been in Botswana over 100 years anyway. So I'm a Botswana, so what?
Thank you. Thank you all for the context. Some very interesting issues raised. I think the whole cultural aspect of the relationship between communities, more consultative communities, more dictatorial communities. In some of our countries, when you hear the word consensus and consultation, some of us develop headaches. So clearly, it might be a cultural thing. I think also the very interesting issue of how do you achieve shared societies and equality and inclusion without creating a tyranny of the minorities. The issue of NGOs has also been raised by President Mogai, the relationship between our governments and non-governmental organizations. How do we make them more productive and constructive? So I'd like to come to a question and answer session. And I think at this point we're really trying to delve, Mr. President, into your personal insights and experiences at the helm. And I want to welcome anybody in this breakfast this morning to ask a question or pose a comment that would help us kind of pull some of those insights out. If I don't have anyone, yes, then I will begin. Mr. President, oh, here we have. Fantastic. Your name, a little bit about what you do, and then those questions.
My name is Samuel Wangwe. I work with the Policy Research Institute called Report. One of the issues which have been very divisive after independence in Africa is attraction to the distribution of wealth and the corruption. And in Botswana, you had all this wealth. How do you manage the temptation of an equal sharing of these resources and bringing bad governance because of the resources from the minerals and remain quite as a united democratic society?
No, as I said, we were lucky, maybe lucky in having visionary leaders. How do I do this? Visionary leaders, what does they happen to further of it? As I said, at independence, mineral rights vested in the tribes under their chiefs. We had a so-called 8 principal tribes, and the minerals rights vested in them, and so the government of the day negotiated this that they should belong vest in the state, and promised that the revenues to be derived from these minerals would be used equitably to develop the country as a whole, to prevent people making invidious comparisons between themselves and their neighbors. And that was agreed. And we even went further and agreed the national priorities, as I said, education and training, public health and primary health care, provision of water and physical infrastructure in that way were the priorities. And then when the revenues did come, actually that's what we did. Revenues are reported, and they consist of 3 components: royalties, taxes, and dividends. They're broken down in our revenue estimates and show, and then how they are spent the same. So nobody could say it's not included. So we have national development plans showing what we are going to be doing in plan bill, etc., etc. That's accepted likely. That's how it has worked. Also, when people are really very primitive, they are not corrupt. But when they become sophisticated, then corruption was beginning. So in 1980, I think, 80 or 80, yeah, between 80 and 85, we then created a directorate on corruption and economic crime. So we tried to fight in the bad, I mean corruption. When the ostentatious consumption comes in and so on, people want to do expensive cars and so on, then the problem arose, but we took care of it. So corruption will always be there, but we have to fight it. So we are relatively successful only because we started early. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Another question, please?
Thank you very much. My name is Sam Mumure. I work for United Nations Development Program in South Sudan, the youngest nation on the block. In Africa, especially where institutions are not well developed, there is always reliance on leaders and the quality of leadership to build institutions that can check the leaders. Now, the question I have for Your Excellencies, we have seen countries that you have led where change of power has helped countries to move on. We've also seen countries where leaders do not very quickly, they start as strong leaders with a national vision, but then there is some attraction that stops them from relinquishing power, and that is a big factor for exclusion. What is it to the three of you that eventually convinced you to say enough is enough, we've built up to here, someone else should take over from here, and yet others are actually failing and unable to see that? What is your secret?
And in particular, I know President Obasanjo will have a lot to say about this. Having been at the helm of Nigeria twice, and on both occasions relinquished. Go ahead, and then we'll come to President Kappa and then President Ngare. Thank you.
I don't know about my two brothers, but in Nigeria we have a constitution, and the constitution is supreme. And our constitution is not something that you can just go wake up overnight and say you are amending. I won't mention the country, but at one time, the Nigerian National Assembly were threatening to impeach me because they thought that I had not been leaning to their side. So I then met an African leader who then said to me, look, what is this impeachment thing we're hearing from Nigeria? Who I said, yes, in our constitution, we have a clause which allows the National Assembly to impeach the president on the basis of misconduct. He said, what exactly does that mean? I said, it means that they can remove the president if they found that the president has committed any act of misconduct. He said, look, you Nigerians should not bring bad things to Africa. You go home and amend the constitution. and he meant it. He meant it. I tried to explain to him that it doesn't work that way in Nigeria. He wouldn't take that. I think Constitution and the supreme law of the land just have to be obeyed. I think there is no other way.
Before you finish,
yes.
In the 1970s, I think it was 1979, you could have opted to run. You most likely would have won that election. There was no constitution in your way at the time. Why did you opt not to run for purpose?
Yeah. Well, again, in 1975, when my predecessor, Murtala Mohammed, and I were put at the helms of affairs of Nigeria, we worked together. I was number 2, he was number 1. And there was nothing that we did that we did not do together. So we drew up a plan, what we call a political program, to hand over power on the 1st of October, 1979. After we had drawn up that program, there was an attempted coup that took the life of my predecessor, and I took over. Then there was pressure from internal and external for me to go up. But I believe that the was of a gentleman, and if I may say that proudly here, I was then an officer and a gentleman. political program. We were going to see it through. We executed the political program. And there is no reason why I should go back on that. But I will say this. If I had gone back on that, maybe I would not have gone to prison. Because Abacha then sent me to prison when I started criticizing him. And maybe if I hadn't gone to prison, I would not have come back to be an elected president. So it goes from one to the other. But clearly the point is that this, when you make a pledge, you must keep that pledge. And then the constitution of the land, the supreme law of the land, and it must be respected.
Thank you. Your word is your bond. Amazing. President Mkapa, please.
I have never been an officer myself, let alone a gentleman. I can only say that for me it's a matter of conviction. I worked very closely with our founding president, and he imbued me with a great deal of degree of honesty and service. He served for almost, I think it's 23 years. I'm waiting, I can't calculate very well. For almost 23 years, but he led us successfully through a war with the neighbor. And by that time, really, he was weary, and others were saying that it's time we had changed. A lot of pressure was put on him, and we didn't have a statutory limitations at the time. A great deal of pressure was made on him to run again in 1980. He resisted very strongly, and I must say I was one of those who practically talked to him, and he said no way. Anyway, eventually he was persuaded. He did run in 1980. Getting near to 1985, the pressures were even greater. Why? They said, well, you know, we need you in order to change the economy around, etc., etc., etc. And they said, listen, you know, even if I were to serve another 30 years, you know, the economy would not be able to be put right by me. If I haven't been able to do it in 23 years, why should I be able to do it in the next 30 or 40 years? So I'm going to step down. And I know for a fact that when under greater pressure, also I think of a certain amount of disappointment, so he asked those who were putting pressure on him, asked them, did you ask me to get into politics? They said, no. Where were you? Everyone looked at each other. Said, so no one of you advised me at the time of entering into politics to go into politics. So what right do you have to tell me when to get out of politics? And that was it. So he said, let's talk about a constitution which will enable for transitions that are smooth and acceptable. That's important so that we get a good man or woman to succeed. So that's the first lesson I learned. The second one was when I was under pressure as president, under pressure to allow first to get for the introduction of the statute of limitations. When that was incorporated in the Constitution of the United Republic of Tanzania, and you are sworn to observe it, you must get, as President Obasanjo says, you must really live up by that commitment. So I had to do it. But to strengthen that point, when there was pressure to change the Constitution of Zanzibar to remove the statute of limitations and so on, I stood in the way, absolutely firm. I said, no way. We haven't even tried it twice, and you want us to change? No. So, out of conviction, the thought of even changing the Constitution, let alone a third term, never entered my mind. It has never, and let me say, it has never entered in my mind to try to get back into the political arena the way my brother in Malawi tried to, President Bakari to change the Constitution so he could have a third term. And although he had 2 votes in Parliament, he lost both of them. That's not a very nice way to get out. It's not to leave office at all. So for me, as President Obasanjo says, the Constitution is very solid, and if you swear by it, you must observe it fully. There's no way in which I could have considered changing the Constitution so that I could have a third term. And finally, the country will always be there. We will pass on all of us, but the country will always be there. And there will always be people capable of doing it. Thank you.
Again, respect for the Constitution and the country
will always be there.
Makes me wonder, we
often tell the positive side of our African leaders. Do we often hear this in our media space? And it's fantastic to hear. President, please.
Well, as I said, I had been a civil servant, and I was already convinced that I had formed an opinion that when good leaders stay forever in office, they lose their vision and begin to betray their mission. So, and in any case, in our case, the limitation in the Constitution was brought into being when I was Vice President. So it was very new. And in any case, I felt that I had done enough. And even my fellow members of the party, some of them had always considered me a civil service usurper into politics. And so I was president because I was encouraged by my predecessor. And I felt that, well, I can do as good as anybody else anyway. So I felt I proved that I can do it too. And I was tired, not in my head enough, too much duties involved enough. So for me, it was enough, but also there was a constitutional provision. Then I would not attempt to change it, because I was tired anyway. Thank you. And I already had been saying, so when people stay too long, they do this go wrong. There is, for instance, now, one of my colleagues in Africa, I say to him, you know what, you have done wonderful things and so on and so on. But now you have stayed too long, and you know, things are beginning to go wrong. He said, first, I know you have been bribed by boyfriend to tell everybody to go wrong. So, anyway.
I work with Foundation for Civil Society here in Tanzania. And I believe building shared societies and inclusive development is about making some tough decisions sometimes, not so popular decisions. To each one of you, what was the toughest decision that we had to make to build shared society?
What was the toughest decision you had to make? Perhaps we shall begin with you, President Mugabe.
Yes, well, maybe there is not one. At one time, but anyway, I think that when I was Vice President, but let me mention it anyway, before I go to the next one. When I was Minister of Finance and Development Planning and Vice President, many people, including members of cabinet, many members of parliament, were defaulting in their payments to the National Development Bank. So I led to the Development Bank, but those against them, and go and confiscate their tractors and so on. It was the most unpopular thing I ever did. But I stood by it. It was the law. That one time. The next one was when I was president. Again, people were involved in allocating themselves land in a neighboring village close to town, including senior members of the party and senior members who are also ministers. So again, I made a decision that we will confiscate those and we will pull down the houses that had been put down illegally. And when the thing went there, the press shouted about Yellow Monster and Festus Boy's Yellow Monster. That was very, very unpopular. But that was also very difficult. Because you are dealing against your friends, members of the cabinet. It was members of the public, members of all parties, but also members of your own party, who are members of parliament, and colleagues. So that's a lonely decision.
Most important decision I had to take as an elected president was within the first week of my assumption of office. One of the things that we not seem to have had solution to the issue of coup. And people have said, put coup in the constitution that nobody should carry out coup. But of course, when somebody carries out coup successfully, the first thing it has is the constitution. So it doesn't really matter whether you put it in the constitution or not. And anybody who carries out a coup knows that he has committed treason and is punishable by death. So when he decides to go in, he goes in to do or die. But we have never really thought that we had an answer. And my background was military. And I know that once a uniformed man is out of the military, it's like fish out of water. So what we needed to do is to make sure that it does not matter how long it takes. Once you enjoy or participate in a coup, you can still be punished. So within a week of my taking over as elected president, I asked the military to give me the list of those who have either participated in coups or who have enjoyed the benefit of coups by holding political appointments as state governors or ministers or what. And they gave me a list of 93 officers, from Major General to majors. So they didn't know what I wanted to do with the list. Because if they had known, I wouldn't last 24 hours. So I made it on a Friday. On a Friday morning, I issued the instruction that all those 93 officers, with immediate effect, retired from the armed forces, and they should lay their kit. Many of you knew that you put down all your uniform by that Friday morning, and by noon, they are no longer at the park. Now, weekend is not normally a good period to plan or plan. So by Monday, of course, they were gone, and 93 of them, and I think it has salutary effect on our own stability, political stability.
Having development without a corrupt society, which is inclusive of everybody there. You said in the introduction, and I think each one of you mentioned that. You've all been there, you set up corruption prevention institutions, you got your own assessment of how well they worked during your presidency. Now, looking back, looking in, seeing what is there, I'd like your perspective as to, if you had a second chance, what would you do better? Because we all know things have not gotten better since you left. From my perspective, they're getting worse, maybe not in Botswana, but when I look at Tanzania, we live in a no less corrupt society, we still got problems. But I think now you got the advantage of having been there, being outside and looking in. Can you share your perspective of what could be done better?
It is an established fact that religious strife within countries is the single most potent threat to the stability of nations across the world. Nigeria in particular has been convulsed by recurring violent acts caused by one or the other extremist groups. As a personal experience, experience. I just wanted to know whether this is something that preoccupies you after you left office, and how do you see the future of Nigeria going forward, and whether this being a matter of faith, where leaders also who are in office have faith, and is something that can be faced. I'll be quick with it, but the question for President Mkapa is similar. Tanzania's much talked about peace, in my view, is increasingly being threatened by the rise of corruption in our society. I know you tried during your presidency, you set up institutions to fight this cause. It doesn't seem to me that we are getting the better of it. Do you think that maybe now is the time to take our fight against corruption to another level, maybe a Chinese-style execution of people engaged in this? And Mr. President Muhammad, I read somewhere the story of the fight between your founding president, Senator Kama, and the Bears in the 60s, when they couldn't agree on the terms of agreement for money, and how this put him on a collision course with his previously good friends, the World Bank and others. Today, as our countries discover resources, gas, oil, but also minerals, it seems to me, for lack of capacity internally, it seems to be going to these same advisors. Yet the example set by Senator Kama was to take your own counsel in these matters. What do you think? What is your advice to leaders today, or countries who are coming to this well without capacity internally to plan how to exploit it?
I see the hands, and I will come back to them, just because we have quite a few questions on the table right now. And so, President Obasanjo, let's begin with you. And that whole issue of religious strife, the question posed by Ali Faruqi, and as you end, you tell us, what would you have done differently or better with respect to corruption?
Well, let me deal with the issue of religious strife. It is a little bit simplistic, and it is very important. Religious, you look at Nigeria, and yes, they are almost evenly divided, Christians, Muslims. But really, the major problem, or the major cause of our problem of conflict and violence is in poverty, corruption, and unemployment. Since then, it was tough, but it was tough. And if I hadn't done that, I wonder whether they wouldn't have made an attempt. Since, thank you.
Thank you. President Mkapa, please.
The question has come as a surprise. I've never stopped to think about this. Two instances. The first one is very early in the presidency, concerning the first ministerial resignation that I had to accept. Why? Because the charges or the complaints were very much fabricated by political opponents, and he was very much maligned. And but you know, with the media publicizing all these ill things that he's supposed to have done, you had to decide whether to continue shouldering him or to say no in the interest of the public and confidence in government. I accept the resignation. So that was tough because it was a key position, and especially because I was sure it was being maligned. But that's a different matter. That was difficult. After that, it was easy for me to balance when public displeasure or public opposition was such that you had to ask people to leave. It was easier for me after that first resignation. The second one is this one which I've already made reference to, which was the efforts to change the statute of limitation with regard to the constitution of Zanzibar. It wasn't easy at all because you didn't know what would happen to the union, you didn't know how it would be received. But I had to make the decision, and I made it, and I'm glad that we were able to go through the crisis and sort it out very, very, very amicably indeed. Perhaps amicably is an exaggeration, but anyway, thank you.
I see time's going up now. I'll take questions.
My name is Leonard Sousa from PricewaterhouseCoopers. When we talk about inclusive, sustainable development, to me it means really having development without a corrupt society, which is inclusive of everybody, right? We said in the introduction, and I think each one of you mentioned that. You've all been there, you set up corruption prevention institutions. You got your own assessment of how well they worked during your presidency. Now, looking back, looking in, seeing what is there, I'd like your perspective as to, if you had a second chance, what would you do better? Because we all know things have not gotten better since you left. From my perspective, they're getting worse, maybe not in Botswana, but when I look at Tanzania, we live in a no less corrupt society, we still got problems. But I think now you got the advantage of having been there, being outside now, looking in. Can you share your perspective of what could be done better?
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Your Excellencies. I have questions for each one of you, a different one.
I'm not sure if we can answer. Can you choose your top one?
Yes. I just wanted to know, now that it's an established fact, that religious strife is probably the single most important aspect to religious strife. Religious strife. Who let me speak with money?
Let me come. I'll bring it right back. I'll bring it right back.
It is an established fact that religious strife within countries is the single most potent threat to the stability of nations across the world. Nigeria in particular has been convulsed by recurring violent acts caused by one or the other extremist groups. As a person of your experience, I just wanted to know whether this is something that preoccupies you after you left office, and how do you see the future of Nigeria going forward, and whether this being a matter of faith, where leaders also who are in office have faith, and is something that can be fixed. I'll be quick with it, but the question for President Mkapa is similar. Tanzania's much talked about peace, in my view, is increasingly being threatened by the rise of corruption in our society. I know you tried during your presidency, you set up institutions to fight this scourge. It doesn't seem to me that we are getting the better of it. Do you think that maybe now is the time to take our fight against corruption to another level, maybe a Chinese-style execution of people engaged in this? And Mr. President Mugabe, I read somewhere the story of the fight between your founding president, Senator Kama, and the Bears in the 60s, when they couldn't agree on the terms of agreement for mining, and how this put him on a collision course with his previously good friends of the World Bank and others.
Today, as our countries discover resources, gas, oil, but also minerals, it seems to me, for lack of capacity internally, we seem to still be going to these same advisors. Yet the example set by Teresa Kama was to take your own counsel in these matters. What do you think? What is your advice to leaders today of countries who are coming to this well without capacity internally to plan how to exploit it?
I see the hands, and I will come back to them, just because we have quite a few questions on the table right now. And so, President Obasanjo, let's begin with you. And that whole issue of religious right, the question posed by Ali Faruqi. And as you end, do tell us, what would you have done differently or better with respect to corruption?
Well, let me deal with the issue of religious right. It is a little bit simplistic, and it is stereotyped. Religious, look at Nigeria, and yes, we are almost evenly divided, Christians, Muslims. But really, the major problem, or the major cause of our problem when it comes to violence is in poverty, corruption, and unemployment. Now, you see, when you take all these, whichever way you look at it, and it's easier to put it and say, yes, religious comment. Let me take a couple of them. The militancy in the United States. There's nothing religious about it. There's even nothing political about it. Because they are not agitating for separation or for anything. They are agitating to get better life for themselves. And sometimes I called them when I was president. Because when I was military head of state, there wasn't anything like militants in the United States. I came back 30 years after as an elected president, and the whole place was filled with militants. So they were in the difficult terrain, and I said they should come. I gave them temporary amnesty, and about 40 of them came. And when they came, I received them in my council chamber, and we were talking. And they started, you killed my father, so I killed your brother. With me present, and my chief of staff who was with me, then talked to me and said, "Sir, you are sitting and being modernized." Then we went on. My chief of staff became uncomfortable. And then he talked to me again. He said, "Look, how do I explain to the world like my president is sitting and conversing with moderates?" I said, "Tell the world that your president has a problem and is looking for solution to his problem." At a certain stage, I asked him, I said, "You, young man and all that, why are you in this? And listen to this." He said, "Sir, when you were military head of state, you established UPE, Universal Primary Education. That's why I was able to go to school. I went to secondary school. I went to university. And when I got to university, I said, look, I came from an oil producing area. Let me study mining engineering. I made a 2-1 in mining engineering. 3.5 years, I have left university, I have no job. What do you want me to do?" That has nothing to do with religion. And you find that almost anywhere in the Nigerian situation, whether even it's Boko Haram in the north. I went to my which is the seat of Boko Haram. It wasn't religion. It was indoctrination. It was revenge. It was because they had no job. It's because some people were harassing them. So, yes, I don't say that it cannot be overlaid on religion. It's easy to explain. That religion is not the fundamental cause of our conflicts and violence in Nigeria. Corruption. I don't know the experience here or with President Muhammad. We set up 2 bodies, and I especially wanted to get people to lead 2 bodies, and they did marvelous job. But the problem with corruption is this: it is the hydra-headed dragon, and never you think that you can wipe it out overnight. That's number 1. Number 2, the interest, the entrenched interest is very, very deep. They can lie low and then wear their ugly heads whenever they think that the condition is conducive. And that was what has happened in Nigerian days. The political will to fight corruption must be at high gear all the time. And I underline all the time.
Mr. President.
Let off or let down will make the dragon come with vengeance.
So very briefly, looking back, is there anything in particular that you would do that you didn't do or that you would do differently? Very briefly.
I will do exactly what I have done before, and I will just make sure that nobody comes in to set at the hand of the clock.
Thank you so much. President Mkapa, your 2 questions relate to corruption.
Only one.
Ali also asked about corruption, saying
yes. No, my answer is the same as President Robusto. I wouldn't have done anything different. The streamlining might have been different, but in terms of the law, the institutions, I wouldn't have done anything different. Let me say this: one of the problems of leadership, of service in African democracies, whatever it is, for young democracies like us, is that people are scared of life after work, life after the presidency, life after minister, life after chief executive officer, and all that. And if there is uncertainty about the longevity of those offices, the temptations are even greater than usual. So there must be some social reconfiguration of remuneration and post-retirement life benefits. Until you tackle that seriously, there will be a lot of thieving and corruption and whatnot. And as President Obasanjo says, neither this generation nor the coming one will finish it off without it.
social reconfiguration is required. Please, President Mogai, would you do anything differently when it comes to the issue of corruption? But also, are we failing to look back at models that we could use? Are we ignoring historical lessons?
No, I wouldn't do anything differently. The important thing is as pointed out by President Kappa. Corruption is not something you get rid of and push away forever. So I could have done better in other people's judgment. But whatever I have done or could have done would change with time. Corruption is there. We have to be permanently before, but whoever is in charge. So, as a leader, you can do is do your best. Ensure that you find it to the best of your ability. And you may be like you will succeed. But that success is not going to be permanent. Even if you yourself were to stay there much longer, it would come back. You would have to come on fighting. And if you retire, then because you have to retire, the people who succeed you are going to have to do the same, fight, because it's part of human nature, corruption. That's my answer to that. Now, there are gentlemen asked about Sabatama, and yes, I can't remember what was the question. Because the truth is that Sabatama made a mistake actually. When the bears first came, when they discovered the minerals, they told him that this find is marginal. It's not going to be practicable. And it's in the middle of nowhere in the desert country, which was true. We would have to provide water, roads, and airstream, everything. And so we will need, we'll only go in if you guarantee that you allow us to have accelerated write-off. That is, to cover our capital invested first before we can pay taxes. And he agreed. And I don't blame him because we should know better at that time. And there was not as much advice available as it is now. And so it was agreed that they only pay nominal royalty. And then he asked them, but how long will it take to cover your capital? They said 7 years. So, okay, we enacted legislation to exempt them from taxation for the first 7 years. But lo and behold, when they began operating in 1973, this capital was 67, they recovered their capital in 18 months. So both they and us celebrated, we toasted each other. But after we had launched the champagne, we said, oh, by the way, now we have to renegotiate. Because this was this agreement was for the national project where you are exposed. Now you are no longer exposed. So that's why we set up the negotiation team consisting of senior civil servants, including me, and people from the World Bank, the Commonwealth Fund for Technical Cooperation, from Canadian CEDA, and we had negotiated also consulted a British man who had been Attorney General here. I forget his name, that he was a white man. So we renegotiated for 2 years and got a good agreement where we got 75% of the total revenues. That 75% was to consist of royalty, taxes, and dividends. And the royalty is variable in order to ensure that it's 75 to government, 25 to the company. And then the marketing arrangement was to be negotiated every five years. You know, BS was the monopoly. So that's what we, okay, we did it during this lifetime. But maybe we should embrace Brazil for putting us together with all these experts they did as well. This is really Eigen, with whom we founded Professor and I co-founded Transparency International. But when we hired him, we got him from the bank. We had him resign or take leave of absence and was provided to us by the Ford Foundation. And we did so with a number of experts. That's what happened in short.
Okay, it's a different world now because now we have, I think, the African Development Bank with a department that just deals with advising governments on these contracts, which is a great thing for the continent. Now, I'm going to take a few more. I see all the hands going up now, and it's time for us literally to wind up, but I will take a few more, and I will ask you to indulge me by coming up here to use this mic, as we are having a problem with a roving mic. So please, you can join me up here.
And all who have asked difficult questions, we are going to ask them difficult questions back.
Okay.
Mine will be very brief. One is a request to the participants who are here this morning to be outside except President Mkapa. So we can celebrate his 75th birthday.
President Mkapa is celebrating his 75th birthday after doing a lot of work for this country, especially on the new front. I'd like to pose a simple question to President. In my humble opinion, when the Bretton Woods institutions were grading countries in the world according to riches or poverty, they placed Tanzania, if I take Tanzania, or Africa as a whole, as poor continent, poor country for Tanzania. But I think they misunderstood. They were taking people of Tanzania as being Tanzania, because I know the people were poor, but the country or the countries of Africa were not poor, particularly in terms of natural resources. And people believe that they were poor because their country was poor. Now, we still have some hangover. We are still parading ourselves around the world as a poor country or poor continent. When in fact, and we say we go around looking for capital because we need money. Money to exploit gas, oil, minerals, and so forth. But I think there could be a need, Your Excellencies, that Africans, and most African countries should change this time. Should look around the world as rich continent, rich countries, rich people. So that when we want to exploit gold, exploit gas or oil, we can go to our colleagues and say, you have your money as your capital. We have our oil and gas overall as our capital. And let's sit down around the table and negotiate as equal partners. But sadly, until now, we are still saying we don't have capital. So come and exploit our oil, come and exploit our gas, and then you can give us a bit of royalty. Your Excellencies, how can you advise your successors to see that capital is not just money, but capital is the enormous natural resources you have? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it comes back to the issue raised by the presidents earlier, and social reconditioning is what we're talking about. Please do join me up here. And if you take more than 1 minute, I will be behind you prodding. So please do meet the two gentlemen there, the one in the red top and the one in the grey top. Please come forward.
I'm scared to do that. My name is Abiri Kaku. I'm the UN Regional Coordinator in Tanzania. Before that, in Nigeria, of course. Welcome, President. I have a question. I once heard President Mkapa say to me that one of the most important things in life is what legacy that the man or woman leaves behind. So, in the context of our discussion today, in terms of shared society and inclusive sustainable development, I would like to ask the three of you, which legacy do you think that you have left behind in your own words with regard to your tenure in office? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Excellencies, my name is Mustad Murad. I'm the Regional Director for Africa for international idea. I also had the honor to serve in President Mokai's administration as his ambassador to the African Union. And it was a fantastic time for me because at that time also President Obasanjo was chair of that. And I learned a lot from the two leaders. My question is about, in the past or in the early days of the independence of most of the African countries, there was an over-concentration, understandably so, of power in the executive at the expense of the other arms of government. And I'm wondering if that has changed today, because I still see that threat where there's over-concentration of power in the executive at the expense of the other arms of government. And that whether we will have proper checks and balances as we move forward, especially going into Vision 2063 of the African Union. And also, another quick question is that most of our countries adopted constitutions almost modeled on the colonial regimes. And I'm wondering how many of us or our countries have revisited those constitutions and to see whether they are still relevant today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Joseph Sheffel. I'm country managing partner for Ernst & Young. Your Excellencies, got two questions. One is regarding the fact that...
Now limiting it to one.
Correct, yeah. We endowed with the Abidjan's natural resources, oil and gas and mining, and increasingly there is an outcry by local communities and as well as local private sector. In the context of inclusive sustainable development shifts, what can you share? There are success stories across all countries. In Nigeria, the aspect of the local context, Botswana, private sector participations, and doing business, great stories, similar to Tanzania. What wisdom can we share in terms of leadership fronts?
Thank you so much.
My name is Felix Mosha, and it's just one question. I come from the Confederation of Tanzania Industries, and the question is to my mentor, President Obasanjo, just to tell us how you proceeded to empower Nigerians, so that Nigerians were able to participate in the oil industry, the gas industry, and created banks. How did you proceed to empower them? What have been the benefits? What have you seen as advantages to the country? And what can the rest of Africa learn from that experience? Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. I see you writing all the questions down. I'll ask each of you because of time, and I see your handlers looking at their watches, so I'm very aware of time. I will ask you to address the questions of most interest to you, and in particular those that relate to you. Before we do that, there is no woman this morning who has asked. Has anybody noticed this? Yes. Is there a link? Please come up, and in the interests of some kind of gender equity, I will take two in there, 30 seconds each, please. And next time, ladies, put your hands up first.
Good morning, Excellencies. My name is Khotata Salala. I'm also from International Idea. I'm a senior program officer responsible for democracy and governance in the African program. My question is really about the previous comments that each of you were making about national visions, and each of you sharing the experiences around how those national visions were translated and how you drove them in your particular countries. President Kapa, you talked about the national vision and the Tanzanian experience. Former President Buhari talked about in Botswana, the importance of the consultation. So I would like to know, though, how did you translate that energy, that dynamicism, that excitement, enthusiasm of having a society that, also such a society that is inclusive, of having everybody participating in the dialogue around what the national vision is? How do you translate that into institutional behavior, into the manner in which then at the end of the day government behaves, and how the bureaucrats at the end of the day really drove the national vision that everybody had bought into in terms of what the priorities were? Thank you very much.
Good morning. I am Tonya Kandiela, and I'm with the African Development Bank. I went to secondary school in Botswana, with the non-lady secondary school, so I know Botswana quite well. Yeah, thank you. I have a very quick question. During your time in office, what is the one thing that you learned from each other or other African leaders? Thank you.
What was the one thing you learned from each other as African leaders? Fantastic. I think we will start with President Mkapa. You look ready. President Obasa, go ahead.
Well, we have a mouthful here, but I will be very short and replying taking all of time. How do you advise your successor? For me, the thing that you must learn not to do is to advise your successor. Now, because it won't be long before you become internal enemies. If he asks you for advice, give the best that you can. If he doesn't, then you ought to go home and sleep. That's my own advice. Let this it's simple for me. When I came out of prison, and the pressure was mounting on me to contest election in Nigeria. That a number of Nigerians came to me and said, look, don't subject yourself to lies and deceit. That Babangida deceived Nigerians, Abacha deceived Nigerians, and here is Salami. He will deceive Nigerians today. And I said, look, if Absalami deceives Nigerians, I will go back to my farm. I have a farm to go back to. And when the process started, some came and said, you will be the last president of Nigeria. I said, why? Because they say after me, there will be no more Nigeria. Because Nigeria was moving towards the precipice. That Nigeria is still a country today, and that after me, we have had 2 presidents. That is my legacy. Too much power in the executive. I don't know. I have said here that I was threatened with impeachment. That's not power in the executive. That's power in the legislature. For a country that is not yet a settled society yet, there must be a means of holding it together. And I believe that there must be sufficient, I will not say excessive, sufficient power in the executive to carry out that task of holding it together. And it will vary from country to country. In a country like Nigeria, as diverse, differentiated, maybe the executive need sufficient power to be able to hold the country together. Constitution on the colonial system, well, we have the constitution based on the British parliamentary system, and I think we have gone more or less to the American system, American colonial system. So So, the American system will be different. Different that takes into account our special situation in Nigeria, where there must be, as I said earlier on, federal representation, federal character. I don't see anything wrong in adopting anything that you think suits local content. We have oil and gas. Our policy on oil and gas has not been too good, particularly from the beginning. And when I became president, I looked at how much of local content is in the oil and gas industry. Not much, less than 20%. And I believe that we could get as much as 75-80%. And we embarked on that program, which has now been made in the law, and it's working. Agriculture, now we don't talk of agriculture. I don't talk of agriculture. I talk of agribusiness. Agribusiness. The whole of the value chain, from land clearing to the food on the table. It's all that range. It's agribusiness. Empower Nigeria. I think you are talking of probably empowering Nigerians, and by empowering Nigerians, you are empowering Nigerians. Everything we have is meant to empower Nigeria. I've talked of local content in the oil and gas industry, but in agriculture particularly, and agribusiness, that is one area where Nigerians must be empowered. And what did we do? Again, which is part of this shared society. Our farmers, particularly the smallholder, they need to be there. And we subsidize fertilizer to 25%. All the inputs, what was necessary is to get to the farmer, so that the middleman is not the one taking advantage of the subsidy. Again, when I was in prison, the minimum wage was 3,000 naira a month. My experience in prison shocked me. A warder one day I was talking to him, and I said, "How are you managing?" He was getting 3,300, and he said, "I have 9 children and 3 wives." But that shouldn't allow me. It's normal. And I said, "How do you manage?" This is he said, "I sent my daughter, 14-year-old, to go and work and subsidize and bring money for the family." I said, "Do you realize that what you are asking that girl to do is to prostitute?" And he said, "What else can I do?" I'm not sure. So when I came out of prison and I had the opportunity to learn of a second chance, I did not wait for anybody to make minimum wage, not 3,000, but 7,000. To make minimum, not just minimum wage, minimum living wage. It must be living wage, not just minimum wage. National issue. We have something we call needs. President Nkapa talked about 2025. Ours we call needs. It's our national issue, which is Nigeria economic empowerment development. had it at the national level, we had it at the state level, sleeves, and at the local government level, if you call leaves. And it takes every aspect of development, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and so on. I think these are the issues that I remember best.
As we move to President Mkapa, just very quickly, what did you learn from other Africans?
Oh, yes, that's one I know. President Mkapa has talked about. I came here when I was military head of state. And I said to President Nyerere, I said, this wonderful program you have had, Ghana. President Nyerere looked at me and said, don't mind you, Ghana is a failure. I said, sir, what do you mean? He said, I learned one lesson. I learned the lesson of how tenaciously an African is attached to his ancestral land. They are strongly attached. What I was trying to do is to pull those little hamlets together. That people will not leave ancestral land where their forebears are buried. I learned a lesson from that. I learned a lesson. Another thing, again, Robia, I asked him another question. I said, how is your woman one household? He looked at me. He said, don't let anybody see. It's not for me. And he looked at me, said, like this. It was at the couple. He said, some of them have their daughters 15 years, they have the house. Their sons, because they have to go, they have the house. They have one house for themselves. That you can see how my one house, one man in the city is not poor. Again, I learned the lesson. But more important, I learned the lesson of not trying to price. The best way of dealing with price control. Because if you don't have enough, any effort to control and price will fail. And when I tried it, failed.
Thank you, President Mkapa, please.
Thank you. I shall be very brief indeed. What you call them, this digital bullets, that will be my answer to bullets or bullets. Resources as capital, I agree entirely. In negotiations, you can't go there as if you have nothing on your hands. But that is different from saying that capital is ineffective or unnecessary. In fact, as many of you, at least Tanzanians know, I have said frequently that we had in the Arusha Declaration the four conditions or the four prerequisites for development, which was land, people, good policies, and good leadership. I have said we have forgotten there the element of financial capital. Because you can have all those things, but in order to modernize your economy, you will need some capital with which to get technology, with which to get skills, with which so I agree that in negotiations you must not go blindly or to go with empty hands. You do have assets, and you can use those in negotiations. So I have no problem about that at all. But whether you have negotiating capacity is the big question. And this is where I really have work. But I'll join this one, the next one. What was what?
Just before you leave that, Mr. President, I think the issue was the poverty mindset. I don't know if you can hear me, but the fact that you both seated at the table already under the impression that you are begging, and yet you are the one with the natural resources. And how do we then counter that?
Have some self-confidence, for goodness sake. You go to those negotiating tables, you find that on your side you have advisors coming exactly from the side which you are negotiating. How can you operate that? So, anyway, forget it.
Just before you leave that, I think one thing that we can do for ourselves in Africa is to build up a core of negotiation. You have these international corporate bodies. They come in with bags and experienced lawyers, experienced negotiators, and we are faced with our officials. And by the time we know where we are, they've broke us from their fingers. I think we need to have core of negotiators, and they must be there for any country that needs them, either through the UNDP, ECA, AU, or even World Bank.
UNDP, World Bank, or some kind of an African institution. I'm not sure. Please, sorry, President Mkapa, we rudely interrupted. Please go ahead.
Okay, fine. What legacy? It's not really for me. It's up to you to decide what legacy I have. Something is a very bad one. Let's see. Let me say what I set out to do. I hope I should remember. First, the question of debt relief. This for me is a terrific legacy because really we were hopelessly indebted. And this one I take my head off to President Obasanjo because he had his debt wiped off in one wave of the hand. But we were very heavy that everyone in Tanzania here knows. We had to reform the economy, the civil service, and everything else in order to get some debt relief and get a foundation now from which to start building a more independent, if you like, economy. That is something that I tried to do. I don't know how well I succeeded. That's something to decide. But I would like to think that I made an effort to restore or to entrench the power of the people. One, with regard to their cooperatives, they were in a shambles, and you all know. I tried to do that. Secondly, I tried to restore the voice of the trade unions. We would make them very regularly at the State House to talk about this, the state of the economy, their wages, their claims, and whatnot. Again, it is to entrench or encourage this participatory process, not to think that it's my preserve because I'm president. No. So that was with the trade unions. But more importantly, now, as I said in my introduction, for once I tried deliberately to bring in the private sector as an important change maker in our country, economic change maker. This really I did try. And, meeting them every other 3 months, the chambers of commerce, international ones, and so on. Opening up the mining industry, it may have been on bad terms, but there was no mining industry. Yeah. You had state corporations that were doing nothing except earning salaries from the treasury. That's not the way to build a mining economy. But anyway, it's a long story. That's another thing that happened. But I did really try to restore or protect people's power. Development is self-development. Dependence is excessive, and that comes to on whether we have revisited the Constitution. Dependence really characterizes many of our economies, honestly. And we keep the aid we receive every year is pittance compared to what we are creating ourselves and what we could be creating by way of trading with each other. But we don't talk about that. And the media, I hope, can listen to me. I really hate this glorification of aid. Salvation has come because we have received a grant of $150 million. What kind of nonsense is this? So I hope that I tried to reorient, to understand the basis of development. As Marine used to say, it's the people who think and can perceive what can be done. I started, again, what do we learn from others? I learned from Mozambique, the concept of Tanzania Social Action Fund. again, entrenching this business. You don't just expect what the government will do. Sometimes you initiate the process where you shame the government into helping you to achieve the results. You define what problems you face and prioritize how you are going to tackle them, and then induce the government to come and help you. I learned that from Malawi, which was much poorer than we are. But I sent a personal assistant there, and then I copied it. Fortunately, after I took back, Mozambique came in to learn from us, ironically. But that's another one of the things. The power, the self-reliance, sitting together, what can we do ourselves? I think this is being lost. Have we revisited the independent constitution? Well, they have. In Kenya, they have. We are doing it here now. I think we are doing it all over Africa. It's a realization that perhaps we should try to make the constitutions correspond to the political and economic realities of our time. That's a different matter. Excessive power in the executive, I agree entirely. Ironically, although I'm supposed to be very dictatorial. But I do agree that there is excessive power in the executive, absolutely. I think in Africa we're at the stage of evolution now, where you do need a certain balancing of power. The trouble is there will not be balancing, but there will be rivalry, and it will be a rivalry to the death. This is the trouble. You know, if you look at the criticisms, they're ad hominem, person to person, not issues, not strategy, no. And that is not very conducive. So perhaps that is why you need excessive power in the presidency. I don't know. But I do feel that there is currently a little more power sharing on the helpful. As long as ultimately you know where the buck stops, that for me is important. How prominent is the private sector? I told you how I like to think that that is one of the legacies that I should remember by. The only problem, how strong is it in Tanzania? It is not strong. It is not strong. You have very many, well, not very many, but many CSOs and so on that call themselves economic or something rather, but they are not doing anything other than meeting, seminars, whatnot. That is not the private sector. We're talking much more about how to do business than actually doing business. And that is the problem, as far as I'm concerned. Really, if you are not in Bagamoyo, you are in Morogoro, you are in Arusha, you are in Mont, you are not building the economy. You are just talking about how to fish. No pond, no oil. So, I am very unhappy about the still very peripheral role of the private sector in economic policy formulation, in strategy formulation, and in implementation. So much of which is left to the state and their state organs. This is the real problem as far as I can see. One other thing. We will not move very quickly until we have think tanks in Africa that will help these excessive executives, excessive power executives. But independent think tanks, we must. Because the world is changing much too fast. The relations between the developed world and our world are changing so fast. But we don't know how much they are changing, what direction they are going to. Who knows what the Trans-Pacific, whatever it is, investment and trade pact, which is being negotiated between America, Australia, Southeast Asia, and so on. What impact will it have on our trade relations? Who is examining it? You know, we've been engaged now with the European Union in negotiations for a new economic partnership. I was glad this morning when I got up, I heard that the African ministers, I think they were meeting in Uganda, have rejected the proposal from the European Union. Because that's what I've been trying to argue the case for. The EPA, yes, they were rejected, absolutely. I said, hooray, they're still home. But you know, what think tank has actually tackled this question of relations between Europe and Africa? Because like it or not, from the slave trade to now, they are our biggest interlocutors or people we are talking to. Where are the think tanks? The slave trade. So I really do, I know Professor Wang is there, he has his research. Yeah, you are struck fully and very friendly. How often? the few industrialists there are in our country, the few industrialists, how often do they meet with the excessive power moguls, if you like? How often do you meet? So the private sector, no, in my view, they need making more love. National vision, I think one good thing, and that's why I said I hesitate, because rather than the person, rather than the leader, it's the party. You see, the party in our country, fortunately, was here for so long, it built a national ethic that even when other parties sprang up, you will see them model themselves on the ruling party. You see, that suggests that there is a national ethic and a cultural disposition which is very, well, not uniform, but very national. And that's very, very good. The credit is to the party rather than to any individual leader at the present time or in my own time. I still ask for. And 2 years ago, was it 2 years ago last year? You know, I'm aging so fast. Thank you for the celebration that you left your hands for me. But I think it was 2 years ago I went to the University of Dar es Salaam. And I said, listen, every year here, you have a lecture and a discussion, a whole day's discussion, on the state of politics in Tanzania. But I haven't heard of any of the universities, Dar es Salaam, or any of the new ones, that have held a day of serious discussion about the state of the economy in Tanzania. Why? This excessive obsession with politics, and the politics of personality. Why? It's the economy, as Clinton said, damn it. It's the economy, yes. So I really urge that a little more attention should be given to the economy, and not on personalities. It would help to move us forward. I've spoken too much and probably excessively, but rather.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. President Bongai, you actually also have the final word today, so Keith, over to you.
Yeah, so in my final way, I agree with everything that my regarding negotiations with the investors, whether in any sector, I think we have much better capacity than we used to have. And there is plenty of advice. There are, in fact, a number of African experts in different sectors all over the place. They are there, they are available. Where you need to get them, you can. That's no longer a problem. I don't think so. Even a number of our nationals are now an expert in those negotiations. So I don't think it's anything to worry about nowadays. Constitutions, they have evolved, I think, again, as the President has said. And the lady asked about what have we done to implement the visions. Well, yes, in our case, they are reflected in our policies. We even have an institution which monitors implementation by the different sectors of how far they are doing towards the attainment of the targets. The education sector, the agricultural sector, women's sector, so on. And so we are monitoring implementation in there. What do you learn from each other? Well, I learned a lot almost every day from all my colleagues here. One of the things really was tolerance and reconciliation. One of the East African leaders here, who I mentioned by name for a change, is Museveni. I think Museveni is overstayed now. But I learned from him, when he first came to power, it was fashionable for leaders to have an ideology. So he did have some kind of ideology. He did something. He appointed what I considered an over-heavy government, where you have a minister, a deputy minister, a minister of state, and an assistant minister, and then advisors. But I realized that what Museveni was doing, one pretending that he doesn't observe parties and so on, when he said he had a non-party government. What in fact he was doing, he was being accommodative. He tried to include all sections, whether they were parties or whether they were tribal organizations or traditional organizations, he included them. So I think in that sense, one, for instance, type of a treat is talking about Jewish societies. I think in the first 10 years of this administration, I really take off my head for him. But Obasanjo too, what he did, in different circumstances. So that I looked around it so that you have to be focused, you have your own vision, and be focused in what you are doing. But nevertheless, allow the possibility that you might be wrong. So that's what I learned from not one person, but different people as we went along. So those are some of the things that I have learned. Legacy, but I read what I consider an open society and an open country. I didn't believe it. Maybe it was indoctrinated by my capitalist teachers, some would I believe in that. And my successor is replacing that. He is deporting foreigners left and right. So maybe it's no legacy at all. But I regret that is happening. I think it's wrong. I think therefore the standing of our country has declined. We had a very lively history. We were able to train many of our students, in addition to training them abroad, in other African countries, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana. We even had an arrangement with the Swedish government when we were still eligible for aid in the 70s, called third country training. In other words, the Swedes would give us money, give us scholarships, but these scholarships would be tenable in African countries. So that's what we did. We have our students studying in a number of African countries. Later, of course, also when we discovered that when we send our medical students to Ireland and Britain and the United States, they don't come back, we changed, we send them only to Ghana, Nigeria, and here. And also, we used a lot of refugees. We hired them in substantive positions. South Africans, Zimbabweans, Ugandans, even, and some Kenyans. And so, I think we have been, and I'm boasting of that for the first time in public, we have been more Pan-Africanist than most of you in our training, in our engagement. I always boast to the Nigerians. I tell them that we had a sound legal system. We used in Nigerian lawyers. Then our last president of the Court of Appeal was a Nigerian, the late Abuja. And we had lots of lawyers also from Nigeria and from Ghana. And we followed the rule of law. So they behaved according to ours. Our Court of Appeal, they be partly out of necessity, consisted of judges from the regions, from Zimbabwe, from here, from South Africa, and of course, one or two from Scotland. That's because in Southern Africa we use what is called Roman Dutch law. And therefore, we found the Scottish law lords know something about Roman law. And that's why we do them in our Court of Appeal. And since our Court of Appeal was half foreign, we could not intimidate it. So, and we are boastful of that. So, but anyway, the other questions they have answered, so I shouldn't bore you with that. Unless you think I've left something out, I'm willing to answer it. But I think I have answered everything.
certainly wouldn't be boring us, but we've gone way over time. I think it has been invaluable. Thank you so much. Can we give our panelists a huge thank you? Open, honest, passionate. Thank you for sharing your views with us. And as we close today, before the panelists leave, I'd like to just welcome the CEO of Uongozi Institute, Professor Joseph Semboja. Please do come up to the podium, take the stand for the vote of thanks. Thank you so much. Let's give him a round of applause.
Your Excellencies, President Mkapa, President Mogai, President Obasanjo, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the organizers, I just want to say thank you very much. Our three presidents, for taking your time, share your vast experience with us. This has definitely been a very rare occasion for all of us, a very rare interaction with you. The distinguished participants, all of you without exception, but certainly my very special thanks to our two former Prime Ministers and First Vice Presidents, Honorable Samuel Mareshkela and Honorable Cleopa David Nsuya. Thank you for joining us this morning. All of you have met the beginning of our two-day symposium on shared societies and inclusive sustainable development much easier. The tone has been set. Our facilitator, Julie Kichuru, well, there's always time to learn. Thank you very much for a job very well done. And of course, the media, thank you very much for being with us and for your support. So once again, I say thank you and have a good day.
Can you please be upstanding as the presidents make their way out? Thank you so much.